So we're here today to talk about the new era of Form Solutions. Forms Reimagined, a look at their evolution and their future. So to me, this is a really exciting topic because I think forms are underused, underappreciated, and undervalued. It's kind of this thing that we all just have to use, and we've become really complacent on what a form is, and we let them get away with stuff that we really shouldn't be, and we just kind of shrug it off. This is what a form is, and this is how a form works. But there's a lot of technology out there that can make forms a lot better than what they are today, and I'm really hoping that when you guys see this presentation today, you'll get that information. It's really useful for your teams. So this video is being recorded, though it will be sent out later. I do ask that everybody stay on mute, just so that way we don't have too many people talking and we don't have any clutter over the presentation. But if you do have questions, I want this to be interactive. So please, as you are watching the presentation, write your questions immediately. I do get some pre-submitted, but I want to make sure that the people who are here, all 11 of you, if you guys have a question, I want to make sure it's engaging and that you guys are getting the most out of these presentation. So we'll keep it really short with the agenda. We'll do an introduction of who I am, who 4Point is, and then we'll get into the meat and the potatoes of this presentation. What is a form, which I know sounds really silly, but we need to make sure we're all on the same page when we start talking about what a form is. So that way we can talk about where we are with forms now and where are forms going in the future. Then I have a special offer from 4Point to help you in your form journey. And then I want to go into a success story, something that we've actually seen be implemented in being able to see some of the results of all the hard work of modernizing our forms. And then I want to leave you guys with some tips and tricks. So how can you get started, some tools that can help you, and then of course get into the Q&A. So I think it'll be a fun little experience. So again, I want to keep this engaging. So drop in your chat, who are you guys, where are you from, what industries are you in? Knowing where you guys are from allows me to help make sure that the examples I give are more relevant. So if you're like in the government, or if you're in manufacturing, or if you're wherever you are, I can try to aim some of the examples towards something that will be more impactful for you guys. My name is Angele Taylor, and I've been with 4Point for 9 years. It'll be 10 in May, and I can't believe how fast that's gone. I'm a 2-time AEM champion, and for context, if you've not heard of what an AEM champion is, Adobe selects 40 people across the globe to represent their brand as experts within the Adobe Experience Manager, within Analytics, and within Marketo. And I have been selected twice as an AEM champion. So I'm very excited about that, and I'm glad I can help share my expertise about the product. And specifically, my expertise is in forms. I'm a certified form expert, so that's why I'm doing this presentation. Forms are my bread and butter, and if you would have asked me when I was in high school trying to figure out what I was going to be doing, talking about forms was not the top of my list when I was young. Some interesting facts about me to get to know me. I have 2 cats, Mika and Gizmo, and I collect retro video games, and I'm talking like way back retro video games. We have Pong and ColecoVision and all that fun jazz. So like not just the younger old stuff, because sometimes I talk to my nephew and he's like, oh my God, you have a GameCube. Yes. But that's just some fun stuff about me. I'd love to know a little bit more about yourselves. So again, please use the chat. I want this to be as engaging as possible. A little bit about 4Point. 4Point's been around for over 20 years. So I have been with 4Point for almost 10 years. So I've been with 4Point for quite a long time, and I've seen a lot of different things. And I've done a lot of implementations. I actually started off as a developer. So I was actually working with forms and writing code. And then I moved into more of a content expert and helping to understand how forms functionally work and how you can improve them and better them. So I've seen a lot of things, but 4Point in general, our team is such a diverse group of experts. A lot of our staff, especially some of the more senior ones, have been influential in developing fundamentally how electronic forms were actually described and structured. So that PDF, that kind of world, They were there working with Adobe and building out that product. And so we have a lot of deep history when it comes to forms and forms questions. You've got form questions, you are in the right place. But to get into today's topic, I want to start off before we start really digging into what the future of forms looks like. I want to take a step back and talk about what is a form. Because if we're not all on the same page, we really can't move forward. So I'll give you a second. What is a form? Typically, the response I get when I ask this question is something that looks similar to this. It's an 8 by 11 piece of paper. It's got some spaces that you can write in. My favorite one is that clipboard. When somebody physically gives you a piece of paper with a clipboard and a pen, and they expect you to write it out. This is a digitized version of that, but it's still just a very basic structure that has your name, your phone number, address. This is what people think of when they think of a form. And that's not what a form is. A form is a structure with space in which to write or select content. That is super vague. Yes, this is an example of a form, but that's not what a form is. The problem here is that a form has looked like this my entire life. It's looked like this for my parents and for my grandparents. And because this is what a form has always looked like, as far as most people are concerned, they become complacent. This is what a form is. But it hasn't always been. And I want to make that the goal for today. I want you guys to be open-minded when we go into this, so that way you can expand on what is a form. If we can truly understand what is a form, rather than the medium, like this layout that we're seeing here, we can escape that. The sky's the limit on what we can deliver, because really all we're needing is a way to capture information. But let me tell you a little story. I decided to take my daughters to the Science and Tech Museum, and I promise it's completely relevant. The reason we went to the Science and Tech Museum was because it had been completely renovated, and it was personally my favorite museum in Ottawa. So we went there, and as we were traveling through the museum, looking at all of the displays, we were in like the kitchen area, and they were showing us the different types of kitchen appliances they had, like the fridges and the stoves. And in the stove section, they had like where you actually physically had to put wood into the stove, okay? And then it started to get into like gas and modern stoves and things. But the thing that hit me when I was in that section was there was an Easy Bake Oven, okay? And this is the Easy Bake Oven that they had. This was not the Easy Bake Oven I had as a child, but this was the Easy Bake Oven that was in the museum, representing the different types of appliances that existed that people had been using. This was the Easy Bake Oven my niece used, so it's even older. But the thing is, it didn't feel like it belonged in a museum. I mean, I had one. I'm getting there in age. My nephew would like to say I'm old, but it doesn't feel like it's old enough to be in a museum. And as I continued through the entire museum, I continued to see this. There was a section on wearable tech, and they had smartwatches, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't feel that old. Why is it in here? And that's what I wanted to get out of this story, is you don't feel history happening. It's your present, and as far as you're concerned, it's not important. It's just another day. It's just something that we're going to have to do, and this is just us living our lives. But at some point, someone is going to step back and say, this was relevant. This is where something happened, like the Easy Bake Oven. And to bring this back to forms, it's about defining the mediums, right? So we had different ways of cooking if we go back to the appliances. But more interestingly, and I think is more relevantly or more closely tied to forms, that we can feel, that something that happened to us, that we can, as a generation, look and say, yes, we can identify all of these things, is music. And they also had this display in the museum as well. I really enjoy the Ottawa Science and Tech Museum, so if you are in Ottawa, I would highly recommend it. But when you went into the museum, they had all these different types of musical devices that would play music. They had player pianos and things like that. But these are all different mediums of delivering music. It's not what music is, right? My dad was a DJ, We had tons of records, tons of records. And then we moved to cassettes. Dad had big piles of cassettes. I even remember having some of my own cassettes and having to like put the pencil in and like crank them. And then I remembered how excited I was when CDs came out. No longer did we have to physically take the cassette out and flip it and put it in, or wind it, or do any of those things. It was fantastic. Loved CDs. And then we had the iPod. Loved the iPod. It was one of the most expensive things I had ever bought at that time. And my father thought I was nuts. But now you could carry all of my music on this little tiny device and carry it in my pocket. It was fantastic. And now you can listen to any song you want in the cloud. Whatever thing you want. So it takes the song Michael Jackson's Thriller, for example. You can buy that on a vinyl. You can get it on a cassette. You can burn it on a CD. You can put it on a device and you can listen to it in the cloud. It doesn't change the actual song. Thriller is still Thriller, but the medium in which we are delivering it is different. And I want you to think that way when we start talking about forms. That 8x11 design that we have stuck to for so long, that rigid structure, is just the medium we choose to deliver it. We can print it and we can do a digital version. That is really what most people are doing nowadays, but it's just the medium which we are delivering the form. It's not actually the form. And now I'm so excited to say we are in a new era because technology has continued to advance, that we are at a point where we can do different things with forms, that we are not stuck to just having that digital version being the best version or having a scanned version. We can do better than that. But before we go in and start looking at that, I want to take a second to step way back for forms and give you an idea of what forms used to look like, so that way you can see that forms also change. Just like how our music was on a record, a cassette, a CD, forms were in different formats as well. And once we really get a handle that they can be something else, they have been something else, it allows us to be more malleable to allow them to turn into something else. So the first of the historic eras that I think we can identify, I refer to as the Inception era. And this happened about 2100 BC. So we're going way back. And so what happened here is back in Sumer in 2100 BC, they started making cuneiform tablets. And so what that actually looks like is somebody took a clay block and they would carve into it their form or document, and then they would bake it. And so it would create these cuneiform tablets. And this was revolutionary. Before this, nobody had anything written down. There was nothing else. This is the first one. And it's brilliant. And it was really driven by technology and by business, right? There was a reason to want to capture it. If I can remember correctly, the first cuneiform tablet that was created was actually an accounting record. So it makes sense that that would be the kind of thing somebody would want to keep track of, because you're not going to go to that much effort if it's something trivial like your name, right? But there's drawbacks to that. It takes a lot of time to engrave it manually, and you have to bake it, and then it becomes quite heavy and fragile. You don't want to chip it, and so it wasn't ideal, but it was a great first step. Next era that we can clearly define, I refer to as the privileged era, and this jumps us to 3000 BC. First off, let's look at the gap. This gap is huge. And so again, people don't feel history, right? We have to go back and look at it, and we can see that there is a huge gap before forms changed into something else. And in this era, what really started to drive this new look and feel of a form was paper. So in Egypt, which is where we're going to start, is they had papyrus paper that they created, and a lot of government officials or people of high status could use the papyrus plants to create paper that they could write on. And then China invented what we know today as paper, but other countries use different things. Other cultures use like barks or animal skins. And so people have been writing on things for a while, but really it was still a really privileged thing to be able to use a form or a document, because not only did you need to have access to something to physically write on. Because I mean, we had the clay tablets way back in the day, but now that we have cheaper paper, thanks to China, we still had the hurdle of, you need to know how to read and write. The vast majority of people didn't know how to read and write. So if they went to some business, well, they didn't really have hospitals, but they couldn't go in and just have a form handed to them for them to be able to fill out. So it was really still for the elite. It was a very privileged thing to be able to use or make or to engage with a form. The next big jump, again, there's a huge jump, is in 1760, and this is tied closer to the industrial boom. Work really became very rigid because we were doing all of these industrial workflows and processes and manufacturing. We needed to have paper that would follow along with the processes, really now coupling forms and documents with our business processes. We need to have this information at this step to be handed over to this person, to be handed over to this person. Other technologies also help make it really standardized, things like the fax machines and typewriters and scanners, so that way we could quickly make copies of different forms, making things look really similar, so that way people got the exact same thing and they fill it out the exact same way. And this is where a lot of what we see as a form today is coming from. This is where I like to think the shackles of what a form is today came from. And I don't think it's their fault. I don't think it's any fault to the standardized era, but they have put in a rigid structure that we are still feeling today. But we are at a crossroads, which is why I'm so excited. We are sitting at the edge between the bound and the revival era. The bound era is where most people are sitting today. This is where we're saying, I have forms and I want to use modern technology. I want to use things like omni-channel or multi-language and things like this. But our forms are still very rigid from the structures and the standardization that we had from the previous era, which makes things really hard to do. We're going to have to go ahead and make multiple versions, or we're really jimmy rigging things. It makes me think of when my kids are building block towers. It's kind of precarious. I see it and I'm like, okay, and then they decide to just move this piece over here. And that's kind of how I feel about forms, because when I look at people's forms, and it's not anything against the form developers who are doing it, it's that our forms were not designed in a way to be able to integrate with these new demands from our business societies. They were very rigid. They weren't malleable in any sense. We weren't easily able to adapt to new data integrations or any of these things. And as we rolled them out, we did it too fast without thinking long term on how could we modularize this? How could we do this in a way that the next time we want to add something, how can we do this in a clean manner? And part of that is because people, I think, it's just a form. Why should I spend lots of time and energy on a form? And that is where we're hurt. So we're in this position now where we're trying to do things, the big push, AI. Everybody wants to use AI. How can I use AI? The problem is your forms are not ready for AI. We can try again and wham it into your forms, but it's not going to sit well. We need to take a step back, look at the forms, and define a new modular adaptation of what the structure of a form is. It needs to be more data-driven, so that way we can scale it more quickly, rather than having this typical one-to-one relationship that most people have. I have one form per language, per country, per whatever, and it expands to a case that's just not manageable. This is what the revival era is people are moving into this other era where we're trying to modularize our forms so that way they're very simplified, they're streamlined, they're designed to do one thing and one thing only. It's really more, if we look at code, I don't really want to get into the code because I don't want to get this technical on anybody, and I don't think forms need to get all that technical, but the way modern code is now written is very modular, so you can switch out this piece and put something else here and it still works. That's how forms have to work. I need to expect to get something, and I will give you this on the way out. So that way you can switch things out if you want to use a different data source or you want to move something to the cloud, because forms are not all in their own. They're tightly coupled to business processes. They're not just being filled out because someone is bored and they just like, oh God, I wish I could fill out a form today. No, they're kicking off some kind of a business process or continuing a business process. So we need to be able to integrate tightly with the rest of the different systems that are in place, whether you're using like databases like Oracle or something, or a Pega or a Workfront, or whatever you're using, whatever tools that your organization is using, you need to have your forms integrate properly with them. And then if you want to change it, you shouldn't be crippled because all of a sudden now your company wants to move in a different direction. This is what having a modularized forms structure will allow you to do. But you can even take that a step further. You can now remove some of the pressures that have been put on your form developers to do things that aren't really building a form, because they're doing things like styling. That's not really anything to do with the form. That's more of a marketing and branding thing. But you can define your forms in a more modular sense so that the styling is done separately to the actual content of the form. That way, if you had multiple brands, for example, but the same content that needs to be delivered, you can just use a different brand to load on top of your form. Using this modular piece, you just look at the thing you need and build on top of it. So it's very exciting, but it is a lot of work to sit back and say, how do I do this? What makes sense for me? And it can get a little overwhelming. With that said, FourPoint is offering a special 1 hour one-on-one with you or your organization, however you want to do it, to talk about where your forms are today, where can they go in the future. And the better way I think to go about this, and the way I like to do it when I have one-on-one conversations about people with forms, is tell me what your pain point is. Because people have become so complacent with forms that they think this is just the way it has to be. We can't do this. This is just how it has to be. But there are so many different technologies and advancements in forms that people don't know about, because realistically, how many of you guys are looking up what's the new modern thing on forms? I guess maybe you guys might actually, because you guys are here for this webinar, but I think the vast majority of people, they're not actively staying engaged on what's new and trendy in forms. They're not reading Document Strategy magazine or anything like that. It's not like when we're talking about security or some of the more, I don't want to call them sexier, but more interesting, maybe more appreciated aspects of different technologies that organizations have. So if you don't know what's out there, you don't know if you can solve a problem, and so you just kind of get complacent with it. So yeah, to me, that's really the place I like to start, but it's your one-on-one. We're giving you time to talk about anything you want to talk about. So I do suggest you hit us up and try to take advantage of that. But I want to give you now a success story, because it is a lot of work. I'm going to be honest. Moving from a rigid one-to-one legacy version of our forms, which most of us have, moving over to a modularized framework, it's work. It absolutely is, because there's a lot of research and analysis that needs to be done, not only on your forms, but on your business processes and the tools around your business processes. It all needs to be really flushed out. And even when you think you know it, once you start asking all of the team members to come in and to verify that you understood that this whole process is, you'll see that you're missing stuff. And a lot of the times people just do like workarounds. They're just like, oh, well, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I just go in and manually do this other step to make it work, so we don't have to spend the time to fix the automated process. But you need to know all those things, because if you're doing it, you want to just fix the problem while you're doing it. So I want to give you some motivation as to why you would want to take the time and effort, other than the fact that you would be able to more quickly adapt to modernizing technology like AI. So let's give you this use case. This was done by a global manufacturer. They needed to create about 4 million invoices annually. And so these invoices were done in 30 countries, 10 languages, and they had 10 invoice variants. So depending on what country they needed, they had specific regulations. Like I know India has a really specific template that they needed to have. And then they had different invoice variants that were very specific to the organization that was looking at the invoice. So they may want to see trailing zeros, they may not. Like it was very specific. And they came to us and they were saying that they were trying to move their accounting system, the actual invoice portion of it, not the letter generation of the part, but like the accounting portion of it was moving up into the cloud, and they wanted to make sure that, their forms invoices were still going to create. But they were using the old traditional method of one form per country, per language, and so on. So 4Point came in and we suggested that we do a modernized, modular, data-driven framework. So this way, the data being pushed into the form would dynamically set what would be in the invoice. So you could, as you were loading it, you could say, I need to have this a German invoice, but I also want it to be in French Canadian. Because French Canadian, they don't have a decimal place, they have a comma, right? All of this would be done on the fly, and they wouldn't have to actually create that very specific template, because the data would come in and the form would say, hey, I need to do these specifications, and it would do it for them. Doing this kind of an implementation let their organization expand into 65 countries and increase their languages to 25 different languages, all while still reducing the number of templates they had. So now they're down to 97% less templates, rather than going through the one template per country. So that, think about the amount of overhead that you're saving. So now, not only do you have to have less to manage, but you're going into new countries, which expands the marketplace for the organization. But anytime you want to make a change, it's drastically faster because it's all data driven. You just change the flag in the data and then it automatically updates in the process. And if they wanted to add another country, because of the modular design of it, we just need to know what country rules they have. If they have any specific country rules, then we can go in and we make those changes for them, or they can go in and make their changes into their template structure. And then that would allow them to just onboard a new country, versus if they have to make one per country, per language, and the overhead, right? So to me, this is an amazing story, and I think this is great inspiration as to what the end goal is. It allows you to spend more time focusing on what your forms actually need to do, because so many of us have so many forms that need to be updated because the font's not right, because brand marketing came in and said we're changing the font base, or there's a million reasons why forms are never up to date, and they'll have different variants, and then you won't know which variant is the real variant. This streamlines the process and helps keep everything really organized, and it's really clean. So that way now, because it's so modularized, if they want to change any of the supporting tools, because it does integrate with other tools as well outside of the invoicing tools specifically, but they're able to switch things out and move things around, and it doesn't really matter as long as the data that the form is expecting, like what country it is, what language it needs to be in, the physical invoice lines are given to the system, it can generate the form. So really a streamlined process. So I hope that was very exciting and you're excited about it as well, because to me, 97%, that's just fantastic. And the maintenance of it, I'm personally, I find it really exciting, which again shows that I am a nerd, that I would think forms are this exciting. But I want to give you guys some strategies and some ways to move forward on how you can start working on a modernized framework. So first, you got to understand where you are now. And I know that sounds kind of silly because you probably live in your forms, you know everything about your forms. But again, it's not a matter of knowing where your forms are. It's more about what are the possibilities out there and what would be useful, right? Without knowing specifically where you are and where you want to go, you can't build that roadmap. So you need to really understand and what makes sense for your organization, because it's not always a clear path. I still think all forms need to be more modularized, so that way you're less dependent on specific outside parameters that are helping to build this form. And I also think it needs to be more data driven, so we're not using that 1-to-1 ratio. But there's still a lot of flexibility on how you want to configure it and what makes sense for your organization. Does it make sense to do it for all your forms? I'm going to say no, probably not. I haven't seen a use case where it makes sense to do it for all of your forms, but I could be wrong. I haven't seen your forms. Maybe they all should be changed. It's about assessing, does it make sense? Does this form get used often enough? Does it have a high value in your organization? Is it super important? Those kind of things. And how much is it going to cost to turn that form over into this new modularized framework? Maybe it makes sense to just leave it in a legacy format. Maybe it's going to be retired in a few years or whatever the case is. So there's a lot of pre-planning that needs to go on ahead of time. And I would say if you want to move into a modularized framework, you need to get a sponsor. If you can attach yourself to another approved initiative that's going on within your organization, whether there's a marketing rebrand's a great one to go in and say we need to do a refresh on our forms too, especially because you can go in and start talking about metrics on how quickly you'll be able to handle new changes and things like that. So that's a really good one to attach to, but you could do something like accessibility or there's a lot of different options. Again, we're giving out an hour consultation to have a one-on-one conversation with people. Excuse me. So if that's something you want to use the hour for, is to figure out how you can tie your current organizational objectives to one of these projects and what kind of metrics we can share with you to help get more approval from a sponsor. That's the way to go, because this is a big project. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, but the benefit is going to be high, because now that if it's a modularized framework, it's more easily adaptable to modernize new technologies that come out. So again, the big push right now is AI, but you can't really use AI if your forms aren't structured properly, if your data is not clean, if your data schemas aren't clean. So you're very limited. But you're going to have another technology that comes out, like if you wanted to use blockchain for your data submissions or things like that. Again, it needs to be structured correctly, and so you want to make sure that you're having that adaptable, flexible, modularized, modern framework. So here are some tools for you guys to try to leverage getting a sponsor, trying to get buy-in from your teams on being able to do it. This we use when we're trying to talk to people about the complexity of their forms, because complexity is one of those weird things that it's really more of a gut feel, right? A lot of people will use a different scale than other people because there is no really defined scale. It's like a pain scale, right? What's a 5 to someone might be a 7 for someone else and a 2 to someone else, which isn't super helpful. So we wanted to get something a little more rigid and give you different areas of consideration when you're trying to figure out the complexity of your form. Because it's not just a matter of how many pages you have. Sure, that adds to the complexity, but that's easy complexity, which is why it's at the bottom tier. It's work, but it's not super complicated. And then you have your saves. What kind of data integrations do you need to have? Where does the data need to go? How clean is your data? How complex are you going to one location, multiple locations? How many saves are you doing? So it can get more complex as you start talking about moving data around. And then API integrations. Do you need to pre-fill your form? Do you need to have a live integration? Like there was one we did, and it was looking at stock rates. Whenever somebody would come into their form, they needed to automatically get whatever the rate is that they were using. I did another one similarly for a lending agency where they needed to be able to get whatever the current rate was for their mortgage or whatever the application was doing. So this was a good tool to help you figure out the complexity. More complex it is, the more complicated it's going to be, and more time you're going to need. But this helps you visually explain it to somebody how complex your forms are. The other tool that I recommend is the maturity assessment that 4Point created on our website. So if you go under 4point.com resources, it's the first one there. It's our business maturity assessment. It takes approximately 10 minutes to do. It's a bunch of radio button questions to try to get an assessment of what your forms are like. And this is really useful because even if you think you are using modernized technology and you are leading in the industry, you may not if you're not always doing the research on what's most recent, what's going on, how are people using it. So this allows you to visually see where you are and gives you some recommendations on how you can move forward. Is there a strategy kind of thing? It is high level, but it is a nice tool to use whenever you're starting to figure out where you are, where you want to go, where are you in comparing to other organizations, because a lot of us are in our own little bubble. And this helps us to see what all people are doing, because 4Point, again, we've been here doing forms for so long. We've seen a lot of forms and we've seen a lot of different implementations. So it's a great way for people to help visually see where they are with their forms. Again, our special offer, I really do encourage it. Having a 1-hour conversation with a 4Point expert can help you figure out a lot of different things about your form specifically. I know I mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again. I would recommend maybe bringing your list of complaints about your forms. Oftentimes we have conversations with people and we're like, oh yeah, we can fix that. And they're like, really? So I think that's a really good starting point, knowing what are the things you want to fix rather than, oh, I just need AI. Okay, that's great. And I can have a lot of those conversations where people are like, I just need to use AI in my forms. But to me, I was never really about the technology. It's more about what's your need. So if we can figure out what your needs are, we can figure out a better way to get you and your organization where you need to go. So that was our presentation. And I'm not seeing anyone put any messages in the chat yet. So if you guys want to go ahead and start writing questions, hopefully it was just so engaging and I was just so informative that you guys had no questions. Or you guys pre-submitted, because I have a bunch of pre-submitted questions. So perhaps you had already pre-submitted your question. I'll give you guys a second to write some questions in the chat, but in the meantime, I'll start with the pre-submitted questions. What predictions can we make about the future of forms? Okay, so future of forms is relative. I don't know how far out in the future you guys want me to go. In the near future, people are going to start moving into this modularized framework. They need to clean their data. Their forms need to be driven by data to be able to connect to other data sources and things like AI, which is what's going to push people in the near future. I think in the further future, what's going to be the big driver is going to be the user experience. And I know we have already started talking about user experience, but we've been taking it from the customer perspective, which is fair enough. We care about client-facing forms and we want to make sure that those forms are really well done. But I think it's going to start shifting to internal users within an organization to be able to streamline their processes. We're going to get rid of those, well, I just do this manually to fix this one step. I think a lot of that is going to be fixed to streamline and to make sure things are just happening a little bit easier and cleaner. How will fully integrated and adaptable forms benefit users? So if everything is integrated, now you're not going to have to leave your environment to go to something else. So a lot of times I hear a lot of people, they're like, well, I have to open up my ticketing system to be able to see the ticket requests and I have to copy paste information over. There would be no copy and paste information. You would essentially realistically have a proper data lake where all of your organization's data is in the same location, so you could just pull. And because it's all fully integrated, it would be pre-filled with the information that you needed, and as you went through, it would dynamically adjust to get whatever other cascading information that you need. I think it's also going to simplify the process for users, both customers and for internal users who are using it, and reduce the length of time it's going to take to do things. Because it's fully integrated, if I need to check to make sure something is happening in the right spot, all of that information will be within the same thing. Forms will become less of a piece of paper that I have to fill out, whether it's on an electronic version or a printout piece of paper that I have to deal with. It will become more of an application that lives within your other tools, and will be more tightly integrated with your other tools. So that way, if you needed a better data capture screen for, I don't know, any of your systems, because I'm sure we've all used something that goes, oh, this isn't a great interface. I think all of those interfaces will be great interfaces. What impacts will this have on businesses and the way that they operate? Again, it's going to streamline things. I think even now, people who are using modularized frameworks, if we go back to the example I was talking about the manufacturing company, they went 97% less templates. So that's just maintenance and overhead that you don't have to deal with. And I want to say that it was an increase of like 65%. I don't have the number right in front of me, but I think it was 65% higher use of self-service portals because people were able to just handle everything within their actual online experience, and that people were abandoning forms. I think it was 55% less, again, as they were able to have everything within the form. They weren't having to go out and then come back in later, have something time out. They didn't have any of those issues. And I think that's going to continue to increase. And if we can do all of those things, then we're going to, we're going to be able to expand into larger markets, which will increase profit, but we'll also have less overhead, which will reduce costs. I think this will also see forms, the responsibility of forms, be split up again, because forms, back before I started with forms, the responsibility of the forms developer was to just create this form and that literally just put the fields on the form. But now they have to do data integration, so they need to be a data expert, and they need to do styling, and they need to do legal, right? They have to go in and make sure that the legal text is all done correctly. But using a modernized framework, we can pull all of those pieces out and give those responsibilities to the people who actually are trained for them. You have a designer on your team, let them do it. You have data experts, let them handle the data portion of it. And then the forms people will go back to just doing forms work. I see a question from the live audience. I'm going to switch over to the live audience question, and then I'll go back to the pre-submitted ones. Can you have different versions of the form depending on what device the person completing the form is using? So versus mobile versus the laptop. And can the form be smart enough to figure out the device and what version should be served up? So yes. So currently right now, lots of people are having different methodologies that they use to be able to do that. Some people are still doing that 1-to-1 ratio. So they're just adding another layer of complexity onto their form using the standardized method. But there's a lot of different tools out there that as you build your form, it also has a mobile version of it. So it dynamically will adjust the screen resolutions. It will recognize what screen type is using it and deliver it to you. So yes, let me know if that answered your question, John. What emerging technologies do you think will have the biggest impact on the future of forms? So again, near future, I'm AI. Everybody is talking AI. So if you want to attach yourself to an AI initiative to do a modularized framework, this is a great opportunity to do that. If you don't have a clean data structure, you have nothing to train your AI on. You have nothing for the AI to be able to do anything on. You can't have the AI fill out the form. You can't have the AI build the form. You can't the AI do anything because nothing is structured consistently. There's nothing for the AI tool to do. It is still coding, right? Everybody sees AI, and I don't know if you guys have used AI. I've used a lot of AI. Whether it's making graphics, making videos, using it as an assistant. AI can do a lot of powerful things, but it is still just code. And so we do need to make sure that everything is structured correctly so that way it can actually go ahead and, be able to respond to the things. Machine learning algorithms, I think that's also going to be a big push. But I mean, we can use all the trendy tech things that are going on right now. As soon as somebody hears the new toy and some CEO goes, yes, I need that, then our forms will need to have that as well. I think another one that I think, if I'm going to throw just another one out there, it's blockchain. I had mentioned it earlier during the presentation. I think that's going to have a big push as well. People are really concerned about data security, and I think people are going to want to make sure that they're using blockchain for their data submissions, and so that their forms are still going to need to be able to adapt to that. Again, need to have clean data. Your forms are not set up that way today if you're using that one-to-one traditional methodology. I did have one other question, which I lost, unfortunately, and I can't remember it exactly. The reason I lost it is because I rebooted my computer because I couldn't get into this meeting, which is why I was late. The other question, though, was very specific, and it wasn't about this presentation specifically, but it was pre-submitted, so I want to make sure I cover it too. Something along the lines of he or she had created a dynamic PDF within Lifecycle, and then when they went to have other users use it, they weren't able to see the save button. And it's not, again, specific to what we were saying, but I do want to take 2 seconds to answer that. So just for the general audience, Lifecycle was a tool that existed, I'm going to say 2010. Don't quote me on the date, but it's no longer, you can't purchase it anymore. It's now been adapted into the Adobe Experience Manager Forms module that allows you to create dynamic PDFs. So think you write information and then it dynamically changes what's being visible. So if I ask how many dependents do you have, it will create the correct number of slots for me to fill out the proper information, rather than having like 10 slots and I'm not going to use all of them kind of thing. So without really seeing your forms or being able to see how people are viewing it, what I think is happening is that people are opening it in Reader, like the free version of Reader, and so they're only able to fill and print. You either have to have it rendered by the server or you have to use Reader extensions to extend the form so anybody can fill it out, which I know can be confusing for anybody who has no context of that, but I hope for the person who actually submitted that question, that question helps them. And the last question I have on the pre-submitted list was, what are some of the biggest challenges in the future form design? I think the fact that we will always be so tightly coupled to technology, and that until people realize that forms are important, they're not going to get a lot of love, and so it will be hard to convince people that we need to make the change on forms. And so trying to get buy-in can be difficult. What we need to do is try to make sure that we are linking ourselves to things that people are finding or that they're considering to be more important, whether or not that's true or not. The sexy things that everyone's talking about, we want to talk about security, because security is so hot topic right now, and AI is so hot topic. But we need to have our forms set up in a way that when new technology comes out, we can adapt to it. And I think that, again, brings us back to the whole modular form design. It will take us some time to catch up, and we'll move into an era where technology, as it comes in, should be easily adapted to our forms. So we have to make sure that we set up our forms in that modular fashion so that way we can handle it. And then I've already mentioned it, but I think we're going to move more towards the actual user experience, making sure that it's engaging and that it's useful for people. There was an example we did for a leasing, I don't remember if it was a manufacturing company or if it was a bank, but they were doing leases, and what they wanted to do is for their agents to be able to go in, and they had this form, which is essentially a little mini application, and they could go in and they could select specific details. They could turn certain things on and turn certain things off, which would generate that custom lease agreement for their actual customer. So I think things like that is what's going to start happening, rather than people using like Java to like create their own complex orchestrations and workflows and things. But that's what I would say. That's the end of my questions. I'm looking back over here, and it does look like I answered John's question, so that's great. Did anybody else from the audience have any questions? I'll give you guys another second. just to write anything. And while we're waiting, I would like to just thank everybody for coming for the webinar. And this is being recorded. I'll have it sent out to everybody so that they can watch it again or they can share it with somebody. If you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out. I'll put my email address back on here. You can also go to 4point.com under the contact us and just reach out to 4Point and it will go to, I think it goes to sales or marketing, and they'll get back to you too. We can talk to you guys about anything that is form related that you think, and I hope you guys found this very interesting, because I think forms, they need more love. People need to get more excited about forms. So thank you all for joining, and I'll hang around for a few minutes just to see if anybody else has any questions. Thanks again.